It's episode 4 of Pause, Rewind and Play. I'm Kim, the content marketing specialist for Kay. Today we chat to Kay Ritchie. She's in the recruitment business for the veterinary industry, but she used to be a vet nurse herself. She provides very interesting insights from an employee and employer side. For example, what hiring managers and clinics can do to retain their employees beyond a good salary. After all, it's one of the main things that can address the global vet shortage that we're experiencing right now. And on the employee side, she stresses how being open with your issues and raising these with your manager is important. A critical self-evaluation every month is part of her best practice toolkit too. It's the only way that you can really get to know yourself, to identify gaps and opportunities. Otherwise, if you just jump ship without this evaluation, you'll carry over the same issues to the next job. Find out more by tuning in. Hi Kay, and welcome to episode 4 of Pause, Rewind and Play. It's a delight to have you because for the first time, this will be from a recruitment angle, and we'll get into your story in a second. But you were a registered veterinary nurse for 15 years, and then you moved on to sort of client and business side for 7 years at Zoetis, I believe. Yeah. And now you're working for Noble Futures. So do you want to tell me your story, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I started with the animal side of things very, very young. So I pretty much always knew that I wanted to be a veterinary nurse. So I started volunteering anywhere and everywhere animal related that I could from being the age of 13. So that was boarding kennels, as was allowed then. I'm not too sure it would be allowed these days to allow a 13-year-old to work. Moving up to agricultural college at 16. And then at 17, joining a veterinary practice. My role within veterinary practice lasted, like you said, for 15, 16 years in total, altogether. I loved my time in practice. I still love the veterinary industry, but I think for me, I had hit that point, as we've heard so many people say for the veterinary industry, of just fatigue. And compassion fatigue on top of that. It wasn't just the role that was there. It kind of come from an emotional block from my side, which is when I knew it was time to move on. Pharmaceutical sales were never something that I thought of doing, but it was the only role at the time that I was aware of moving out of practice that was still going to have that veterinary connection and still use all of the skills that I picked up. I did that role for 8 years and really enjoyed it. But then I had a baby, and being out on the road wasn't what it just wasn't working for me. So my pathway at that point was, right now, where do I go? What do I do? And I actually called Noble Futures to ask what the options were, where I could go. At that point, they were looking for a consultant and invited me forward for interview for that. And I've now been with Noble Futures just under 4 years, working as a recruitment consultant within the animal-related industries.
So it sounds like your path was always in sort of animal health, and somehow you've just landed there time and time again. Tell me a little bit about Noble Futures.
So Noble Futures have been around for 20 years. So they are a recruitment business that deals only in animal-related industries. So we work across vet, agriculture, pet, equine, not directly into the clinics, but pretty much for the end users. So we work with sort of the nutrition companies, the pharmaceutical companies, the equipment and telemedicine businesses as they now are. So what we do is obviously place people in roles, everything from office roles right the way up to sort of CEO level within those roles. So we find, and the reason I really enjoy Noble Futures culture as a whole is we are very big on making sure that the right people go into the right businesses. Pretty much the same as practice. Not everybody is going to be a fit for that practice or for that business. And that's what we do very, very well, is make sure that we're matching the right people to the right role in the right company.
Yeah, I read a little bit on your website that it's really not about being a CV factory, but more about the quality of the candidates and trying to fulfill what they're looking for, their passions, still
Absolutely.
within the veterinary field. But in your personal story, you pointed out to the fact that you needed to transition because of the stories that we've heard over and over due to compassion and burnout. So that lends itself really well to the talking point of the global shortage. For
Absolutely.
some time, it's been brewing even before the pandemic, but then there was the perfect storm of pandemic, and then in the UK, of course, we had Brexit.
Absolutely.
And I think I did read actually in the Financial Times, over half of our veterinary staff are from Europe.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on, and of course, the mental health issues. It's multifactorial. So it might be that there's lots of difficulty in setting up a profitable practice, the burnout, the stress, coping with the huge levels, unprecedented levels of demand, and with clients or customers who sometimes can't pay. So there's financial difficulties. You will obviously have like a bird's eye view, I suppose, being on both sides of the business, but also being in recruitment. How do you feel like the industry will address this shortage?
I think it's going to be difficult, because I think for a long time, the veterinary industry have kind of put their heads in the sand a little bit about the shortages that are out there, and that changes that need to be made to make sure that we haven't got veterinary surgeons, veterinary nurses as well leaving practice, because we are seeing more and more from a recruitment perspective. We are getting more and more calls now from people that either are qualifying and have no intention of going into practice now, or have been 1 or 2 years in practice and actually they are just so overburdened with things that they've decided that they want out completely. There's lots of factors that come within it, as you've said. A lot of it is sometimes the emotional impact of day to day within veterinary practice is huge. Even if it's a routine day, those routine days can sometimes be 12, 13, 14 hour long days. It makes an impact. The other thing is that we are finding that sometimes there isn't the support within practice for both levels. So for the more junior members of the team coming through, but also for the more senior members of the team, where it's assumed because they are more senior that they are okay, that there is no issues. But from the other perspective, what we do find as well is that the veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses aren't open with their employers about where their issues are. So that usually the first call that they make is to a recruitment agency or to another practice or to another role completely to say, these are the issues. Have we got another job elsewhere for me? And the amount of times I say, well, have you discussed what your issues are within practice?
So the premise is to speak up, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get silence at the end of the line where there's kind of, no, we don't have that kind of relationship within the practice. And that is across the board. That doesn't matter whether it's independent. It doesn't matter whether it's corporate. We do find that communication is not severely lacking, but I think people find it very difficult to communicate when they are struggling within veterinary practices.
Yeah, I suppose they might not have the capacity just because they're so tired, they're so
Yeah.
stressed, and to speak up can
Yeah.
be quite daunting sometimes.
Absolutely. It's hugely difficult to do that, and especially in an environment where you know the person you're speaking with is probably also feeling those pressures, that it's there, but it is becoming more like a vicious circle now, whereas they're not talking to somebody because they feel like they're going to be too busy, but then those people within practice are now going to be even busier because they have team members leaving because they couldn't get on top of the issues. So I think there's lots of things out there that can be done, but it's just opening up the veterinary community to really embracing the other options that are there to help them.
Yeah. And so with the the ideal state is obviously offering more flexibility within a clinic or within a company. Sometimes easier for corporates because they have modern and more robust HR processes where they can cater for these needs.
Yeah.
But because of the shortage,
yeah,
what else can a clinic or a company offer their staff and employees to provide flexibility in some capacity?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for any of them. So there are multiple solutions out there that we have seen in some practices actually work very, very well. So we have recently had conversations with a practice that have looked at their consultant hours. So instead of doing their 9 till 7 like they usually do, they actually close in the middle of the day because they were finding people were at work. The appointments weren't needed to be in there, and it gave the time then to the staff within it to do the routine surgeries that have for the last 12 to 18 months have needed to be pushed back, things like neuterines and sort of dentures and those things. They actually have now enrolled in wellness programs so that there are confidential mental health people that the vets and the vet nurses and the reception team actually as well can go off and speak with.
Yeah.
And that's a huge step forward, because that's something, unfortunately, the veterinary industry has been a little bit behind the times with, is looking at what they can do to retain the staff. I think there was, over the past few years, we have seen that the numbers have dwindled of professionals out there to come in and take them on. Technology is also a big one. I think practices is kind of 50-50 at the minute. Some practices really embrace the technology side of things to take the pressure off the staff. So things like the video consults and telemedicine. But we know that other practices kind of want to retain all of the control of the sort of the clients. And it is something that we are seeing, that we find those practices that do use the technologies to make life a little bit easier, that actually the pressure is taken off their in-house team. But it's making sure that they have sort of the attitude that they can give up that little bit of control and work alongside those services, as opposed to seeing them as a competitive service.
It's looking at the whole infrastructure, isn't it, really? Because I do strongly believe that technology can help, whether it's telemedicine or a practice management system. It just takes some of that strain off. But I also just remembered there that with our last interviewee, Chris the vet, he did point out that he did like a mental health first aid course, and it was the equivalent of doing like a physical first aid course, but he really did feel like it was being in therapy for 2 days, is what he said. So again, but it demonstrates the investment in your employees and your staff's well-being, the motivation, happiness level, satisfaction, the retention rate, training, even. Actually, what is your view on training? Like, what kind of things should a clinic or a company be offering? And how much investment into that?
I think the investment needs to be huge. So when we speak with, me personally, when I speak to veterinary surgeons and nurses that are wanting to move out of practice, generally salary is not the reason that they're looking to move out, which has always been the assumption that people are always going to move role because they want more money or they want an increase. Generally, it is looking at the support. And I think from a training perspective, we know that within veterinary practice, and I have personal experience of it, that the appraisal side of things is not the best. People find that they're busy, and then they don't give the staff the time that they need to tell them where the improvements need to be, but really more importantly, what they are doing really well. As an industry, again, that's something where I do think the veterinary industry falls down a little bit, where we don't really congratulate people for doing really well.
So you mean appraisals and performance reviews?
Absolutely. Yeah. The more people that we speak with in the industry, the more we realise that they aren't or being done correctly when they are. I think my last appraisal, and I still remember it, was it took, I think it was 1 minute and 30 seconds was my appraisal. I went in, I sat down, they just said, yeah, you're doing a really good job, keep it up. And that was great, but there was no opportunity then to say, well, what is it that I'm doing really well at? Where do you think my growth areas are? What do you think that you could do to help me achieve those growth areas? And I came away from that just feeling really disappointed, even though they saw it as being a positive appraisal.
Yeah.
That 1 minute 30 was not enough time for them to really invest in me as a team member. And I made the decision pretty much straight after that was it. I'd had enough, and I was coming out of practice. And I still remember that. It's been 11 years since I left practice, and I still remember that appraisal. So I think
that was a turning point for you.
That was a turning point for me of, do you know what? Actually, they've got a tick box to say, yeah, they've done it, and that's it. It's not actually investing in the team. So from a training perspective, it doesn't need to be a blanket approach. Ask your team what they want. Some of them might want training in how to deal with those clients that come in that are a little bit more demanding and need.
I mean, I think it's genuine care and authenticity, because like you say, you don't want it to be like, what's the equivalent of like greenwashing but HR washing? So it's not just this checklist or tick box, but you really need to invest.
Like a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work in the veterinary industry, because we are, as people, I think the veterinary industry as a whole, we are very emotive. We are very emotional about things. We generally, within the veterinary industry, are not very business-minded. There are always the exceptions to the rule with that. But we want to know that we are valued as team members. And that's generally what I get coming through from people that are wanting to jump out of practice, is that they just don't feel valued in that business. And that's something that can be changed from a management level very, very easily.
Yeah, of course. And it's not that vet staff, it's changing the public perception. Absolutely. It's not just that vet staff are the people that save your animals. They're human beings too, and they need nurtured and cared for. Absolutely. So what would you advise people who are perhaps studying, they're doing their degrees right now, they're due to graduate, new starters? What would you advise them? Because I can only imagine, with the constant news cycle, the stories, all the burnout and compassion from perhaps friends might scare them off a little.
Absolutely.
What would you advise them?
It's a scary time. It is a scary time for new graduates in there. And I do speak to a couple of the student universities as well, just before they qualify, about what they need to do moving forward. I think it's my advice would be, go in there with your eyes open. There's no point covering over the fact that the industry has issues. There are some quite severe issues out there, but equally, we know that the industry is working very hard to try and keep on top of those industries. And what we need is for people that are now coming in, that are qualifying, to come in with an open mind, but also open in a sense of being able to talk about where they're struggling, what they're really enjoying to do, what are their plans? Like, do they want to come in and do they want to stick with GP work? Do they want to specialise? Do they want to move into management? You may not know what that is at the moment when you're graduating, but as long as you're always open with your employer about what you're looking for, then you will find that your staying ability within a practice will be there if you've got a practice that you've been open with that can help you out with that. I would probably say try not to judge too much on the stories that you are hearing, because we know everybody's experience within practice is very different, and it's very easy for us to focus on the negative stories because there are an awful lot of them out there. But there are actually a lot of positive stories out there as well. We have a lot of people that really enjoy practice and have found ways of being able to discuss with their employers what their needs are and having their employees focus on those needs. I would say have a plan in place, and it's not something that we as veterinary professionals are very good at, doing a list. But I would always say spend 20 minutes a month, everybody, whether you're a new graduate or existing in there, of what is it that you really enjoy about your role? What is it that you're really struggling with? And what is it that you think that employer could do to help with that struggle? Because if you don't know yourself, sometimes life gets so busy and the negatives tend to compact on each other. So we'll kind of button up against one negative, one negative, one negative, one negative. And then you kind of forget all of the little positive moments that are happening in the middle of all of those. So that would be the advice, is focus on the positive. Try to not ignore the negative, but try to switch it around of, it's a negative now, what can I do to change it in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I had a very similar conversation with Al Payne, the positive vet nurse, and it was just having that glass full approach. And I think it's a great idea to sort of map out or have rough goals and objectives of your career trajectory. And even if it doesn't go to plan, that's okay. We can be flexible. We can flex and we can be agile, as long as I love the metaphor. I always think of it in terms of, when you're in a car, you're driving somewhere, you've got to know your destination, right? You've got to know where you're going, or you'll just end up driving aimlessly. Absolutely. And I always think of it that way. So I'm like, that's why you're right. It's good to spend some time sort of evaluating and assessing what you really want out of life, and you get what you put out, right? And so even if it's just like, as you say, half an hour every month, just do a performance review on yourself. Yeah, for your own levels of happiness. I think that's really solid advice. And I would assume it's the same thing for those who are quite senior, who already have many years of experience. If they want to diversify, do you have any additional advice for them?
Yeah, I think it's number one is making sure that you really want to diversify, and that it's not a jumping ship because your stress levels have got so high within practice. So me personally, I don't know whether the other consultants work the same way, but because I am from a veterinary background, I will always, on initial conversation, send veterinary professionals a way to say, do me a list of what is it that you really enjoy and what are the bits that you really don't, because that will give you an idea of, do you need to be out of practice, or do you just need your focus to be elsewhere, or possibly in a different clinic?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, not every clinic is going to want to work with their teams and do things in a different way. That's just a fact of life. Not every employer is willing to flex and bend. Mm-hmm. But number two, if we are diversifying, is what do we diversify into? Generally, it is always technical advisor. Everyone wants to do pharmaceutical technical advisor. And unfortunately, those roles don't come around very much. And when they are highly competitive roles. So for me, the diversification side of things is really looking at what is it that you enjoy, because probably similarly to my experience, I went into pharmaceutical sales because I didn't know what else was out there. That's kind of, and I did it and I enjoyed it and I was really good at it, but it was a little bit like a fluke that I kind of dropped into it, that it was there. Now we know that there are so many different types of role out there for people that are qualified vets and veterinary nurses, and it's really finding what fits for them. Where is their skill set? What is the type of business that they want to be in? But that's not something I can give them the answers to. It's something that they'll know themselves and can tell me. If they can tell me what they like, what they want, what they don't want in a role, it then narrows the field down a little bit of, these could be the options for you and this would be the advice. Because again, advice from a recruitment perspective, it is a one-size-fits-all. It's never going to work as a one-size-fits-all. We're working with people, and people aren't alike.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I know there's not a one-size-fits-all, but do you have a view or a consensus on like kind of top traits or qualities that hiring managers look for in a candidate? If, but that's nothing to do with their technical skills.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's more the drive and the enthusiasm. The feedback that we get from hiring managers all of the time is they appeared in an interview and didn't appear like they actually wanted the job. They just wanted out of the job that they were in. So making sure that the role that you're going for, you've got the enthusiasm, that you've got the motivation and the drive to learn. Because even though you may have been in practice for 15, 20 years, you were going into a new role where you are going to be right the way back at the bottom of the pecking order to learn. So having having the personality that it has an understanding that that is going to be the case, that you need to want to learn as well, that it's not going to be an easy ride. But I think from an employer's perspective, it is just having somebody in there that understands the role that they're going into, number one, and number two, really wants to do it. We see it time and time again of people applying for roles just because it's a role they think they could do, not because it's what they actually want.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a marked difference, isn't it? I think sometimes human beings can be on autopilot and they just think, this is all I'm good for, this is what I'm qualified for, so I'll apply for it without actually thinking, do I want to do this? Yeah, and the impact that it will have long term.
Yeah, and the other side of the impact that it will have is if we're finding that people have got sort of increased stress levels, so they're applying for more and more roles. If it's not a role that you really want and it's not a role that you have the drive for, and it's a highly competitive role, so we've got lots and lots and lots of applications, sometimes the fact that you don't really want it and you get a no for that position can then impact mentally on, I've applied for all of these positions and I'm getting nothing. So I've just said, just when you are making the applications, just make sure that it is what you want, because the last thing we want is for somebody to have a lot of series of no's and no's and no's, and then that have an impact on them not wanting to apply for positions moving forward.
Yeah.
They might actually be a really good fit. So yeah, that's the
like this domino effect, right? So Absolutely. It's just, if something's not aligned, then it's not necessarily going to work out, and then put you off even more, which is not what you want.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Do you want me to close those lines?
No, that's okay. That's fine. We're almost finished. So, so my last question is just around for the employers and the hiring clinics or hiring managers. Is there any way that they should be presenting themselves, or if there's like a sort of package, I guess, or just kind of top tips on what they should be offering new veterinary staff?
I think it all starts with the job advert, actually, because we see, I think when we looked in total, I think there was something like 17,000 job adverts out for veterinary professionals at the moment within the UK. And most of those job adverts say the same thing. They want a veterinary surgeon, they want to pay this much money, they've got this much CPD, and it's in this area. They're the four things that generally get put on adverts. That's not really selling your practice. It's not. Pretty much every other practice that's advertising can put the same four things on there. They're only different location for them. Speak to the team. Ask what they really enjoy about the practice and what would be the thing that they would say to a new person would be really good for the team. Put that in your advert. Make your advertisement stand out. People want to know the practice that they're joining. They want to know what the culture is within that, what the team looks like. I think one of the best adverts I'd seen was actually a little video clip of somebody done little interviews with a few of the team members of what they really liked about the practice. And things like that really stand out. So from an employer's perspective, do what you can to stand out in a good way. We don't want anyone kind of going overboard with the adverts, but there is so much competition for staff out there that you want somebody to know why your practice is going to be the practice that that person wants to join. So you need to put in there what your salary is going to be, what your CPD allowance looks like, etc. But you also need to put in there what are all of the extra plus points of the practice. So if you have got benefits like wellness schemes for mental health, if you do team nights out, if you do sort of the teams getting together and doing sort of little in-house competitions and things, all of those little quirky pieces may seem like such small things, but actually from a hiring manager's perspective, those may be the difference from a potential employee wanting to join the practice or not.
It's a huge selling point. I think you always, like you said, you need the baseline and the formalities kind of out the way. But really, what is the unique selling point? What's the culture like? Because I know every job that I've applied for, I want to know more than just salary and basic benefits, but the teamwork ethic, the the values, the morals, the culture of the company. That's so important. But yeah, it's really useful to get these insights from a recruitment perspective. And I wonder, as our parting thoughts, final thoughts, do you have any, the top 3 takeaways that you can give us? It can either be from an employee side or an employer side.
Yeah, I think number 1 would work for both employer and employees. Ask questions. You don't get the answers if you don't ask the questions. We are very good within the veterinary industry, but we're not mind readers. So if you have questions about what your team wants from you or what you want from your employer, ask those questions. You may need to take a deep breath and arrange some time to go in, some quiet time to do it, but they need to be asked. So number 1 would be always ask questions and be open about what your needs are within a practice. We want the veterinary industry to be able to retain team. I know I'm working from recruitment and putting people place to place, but for me, I actually still find it really upsetting that I see so many people wanting to jump ship from the veterinary industry. Number 2 would be really focus on yourself as well. Don't forget that whilst you are caring for pets and caring for the rest of your team members that are around you, that actually you sometimes need some of that self-care as well. So make sure you are taking the breaks that you can get. It can be very, very difficult in busy, stressful days. Sorry, that's my dog in the background.
That's all right. We would expect that. We're on a veterinary call. That's fine. This is for the veterinary industry, so acceptable.
I knew the doorbell went. But yeah, focus in. Like I said, sort of even if it's 10 minutes of you need to leave the building, go and sit in your car in the car park out the way of everybody, just to give yourself that breathing space and that time to stop the pressures getting up on top of you. And number 3 is really try to have as much fun in your role as you possibly can. Life's too short to be miserable in your role. So if you aren't happy, then by all means reach out to a recruitment business and speak to them, or reach out to other friends that are within industry and ask them where their struggles are and what they've done to help. It's a really, really, really short life.
I mean, we'd now, I mean, it's encouraging to see we have it's building up a more supportive ecosystem. So as you said, they can reach out to friends, reach out to a recruitment agency or company to find out more, assess the options. Also, VetLife, obviously the mental health platform. I know in the Financial Times article a couple of days ago, they did say they had about 4,000 calls last year, which is sad. But that's why they're there. They are there to help. This was a really well-rounded conversation. Thank you for your insights. We really appreciate it, especially from a recruitment angle. We will, of course, put the resources in our closing slide and we'll point it to Noble Futures. So thank you very much, Kay.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Kim.
If I were a hiring manager or a clinic, I would definitely be using Kay's advice. I like the end where she refers to adverts and why you don't want a bog standard one. If you're to attract the best talent, even the beginning of the process and every detail matters, including the job advert, and thinking about what really attracts people to the job. Additionally, her insights on why things like appraisals and thorough performance reviews are critical. It's a good reminder too on why individuals need to speak up more and have an open line of communication with their manager so that there's a better chance of improving the role itself and day-to-day work matters. After all, we spend hours and most of our lives at work. We need to make it a pleasurable, motivating and enjoyable place to be. Up next is an episode with Georgia Raitt, who is our Executive Vice President of Global Technology Solutions at Covetrus, and I can't wait to hear what she's got to say.